Welcome back to Pixel Project Radio, the video game discussions and analysis podcast. My name is Rick, I'm your host, and today we return to where it all began. Final Fantasy I. Very excited to talk about what will technically be the oldest game on the show that we've covered. Of course, up top, I've got to thank the patrons. The patrons are a wonderful group of folks who support the show, and they're not wonderful because they support the show, although maybe, who knows. They're great independent of that, but it doesn't hurt, you know what I mean? We'll like you a little bit more if you subscribe at patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. In all seriousness, if you like the work that I do here, consider stopping by and taking a look around. We'll talk more about all of the plugs later on. For now, I want to introduce my guest, returning guest Ryan from Listoff, a veteran of this show, a veteran of podcasting, and as we'll come to find, a veteran of Final Fantasy I. Ryan, thanks for joining me again. How's it going?
It's good. All is good. Thanks for having me on, Rick. As always, always happy to be here.
And I'm always happy to have you here. I'm looking forward to talking about one of the most important JRPGs in history. I think it is, anyway.
I agree.
Before we start, if you're new to the show, which I suspect some people might be, considering, Final Fantasy, first of all, welcome. We're glad that you're here. The way things normally go here at Pixel Project Radio is we start with a general discussion on our personal histories, mechanics, music, things of that nature, and then we get into the story and analyze it from a narrative perspective. With Final Fantasy I, obviously, this is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to do a beat-by-beat analysis, but we are going to talk at length about the history of the game, about what we thought of the game, version differences, whether or not this is worth playing in 2025, and so on and so forth. We'll get there in a little bit. So first off, let's talk a little bit about our histories with this game, and with this franchise, why not? Ryan, I understand that you have a long history with Final Fantasy I in particular. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is one of the first impactful video games that I played as a kid. I had a neighbor who gave it to me,
wow.
Which is crazy to think about, right? Because people don't just give people video games anymore.
We used to be a proper country.
Yeah, what happened to us? When did we go astray? But it was, I don't want to get into my personal feelings on the game, but it was a huge moment in my personal gaming history just because I never really experienced anything like this. And, if you listen to my show or have maybe even heard me on Pixel Project Radio, I'm not the biggest fan of JRPGs to date currently, but I was definitely an early adopter, I'll tell you that much, and Final Fantasy for the NES was a big reason why.
Now, you have told me off mic that you at one time were playing this game roughly yearly, so you've got a lot of experience with this game. Yeah,
so up until maybe about a decade ago, I was playing through this game every year. Yeah, pretty much made it a point to play through it every year. It's not a particularly long game, so it was an easy playthrough, and I think it was really just that nostalgia pull that brought me back every time. It was like, if I ever wanted that comfort food, that comfort game where I could just kind of turn my mind off and experience some relatively easy turn-based combat, this was the game for me.
Yeah, that relative ease of combat, that lack of a super deep and intensive story, a lot of things contribute to this game, I think, being pretty palatable, and it does promote replays in that way. It's a highly, I don't know if I'd say highly replayable game, but it's a pretty replayable game, especially with, party composition and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
As for me, I had never played this game before. I'm not kidding. 2025, this was the first time I played this 1987 NES game. Pretty crazy. I had put this off for a long time just because being in the gaming sphere, just being involved in reading about video games, playing other video games, you kind of pick stuff up about the classics, you know what I mean? So there came a point where I kind of knew what was going on with Final Fantasy I, and I sort of kept putting it off. Like, I'll play it eventually, but, I've got other stuff going on. Not right now. I don't really feel like it. I'm glad that I did. I'm glad that we put it together for the show. I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. Even if it isn't quite as narratively rich, there are still some things in this game that really surprised me. One in particular that I was really excited to see.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about that soon. In terms of... Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I will say in 2025, it's not narratively rich, but at the time, it definitely came across that way. This was an era where games were predominantly linear and stories were all surface level. And, compared to your Super Mario Brothers or a lot of the games coming out at that time, this had a pretty deep story and pretty big world.
Oh, absolutely. There's one thing in particular that I have noted a little bit later. I'm going to save that for now. For this episode, I never ask the guests to play for the show. Ryan, you're obviously very familiar with the NES version. Have you played the GBA or the PSP or the Pixel remasters at all?
So I haven't played the PSP or the GBA versions, which to my understanding have additional content. So I've actually never experienced the additional content, but I did play the Pixel remaster for this show. As I said, I used to play it annually, and it'd been about a decade, so I felt like I had to play it, and I don't have the native hardware anymore. I don't have an NES anymore, so the best option for me was picking up that Pixel remaster, and I'm glad I did. I'm glad I did, because now it makes me want to play all the old school Final Fantasy games and some of them I haven't experienced.
It has that effect, yeah. There's something very comforting about this era of JRPG. I've also never played any of the other versions, obviously. I had every intention to play the NES version for this show after I completed the Pixel remaster, which, by the way, took me roughly 12 hours. More on that in a little bit. Now, that being said, there are some hefty version differences that I think we can maybe save for a discussion in a little bit. But before we get there, let's talk Community Forum. If you're new to the show, or if you've listened and tuned me out, which, let's be honest, I think most people recommend doing that, the Community Forum is a channel in the Discord server where our Discord members can contribute their thoughts, feelings, ideas, haikus about any game or topic that we're talking about, and provided it's not overly long, I will read it on the show. And we've got a couple of responses here for Final Fantasy I, starting with Chris Physics, Discord regular, streamer on Twitch, I believe. Here's what Chris has to say. He says, yes, the first game to ever make me cry. Not because of moving narrative or relatable characters, from the sadistic punishment I received for playing this game as a kid. I distinctly remember having any party become paralyzed, watching their health slowly dwindle. Occasionally, I'd be given hope as one of my characters would regain control. But as quickly as it came, it went. They were paralyzed once again. I tried and tried to muscle through this fight, only to lose 30 minutes later. I haven't picked it up since I was a kid. I turned the NES Classic off and have been crying ever since.
Ouch.
That touches on something that I was a little surprised to find. This game is more challenging than I think I was expecting.
Yeah, and you played the Pixel remaster, so...
I played the easier version by all accounts.
The NES version is it can be very punishing, and I've lived the very thing Chris is talking about many a time myself.
So have others. Others find it challenging, and it might dissuade them from playing it, such as our next contributor, Matt Storm. Matt Stormageddon. Here's what Matt says. I'm just not a fan of this one. I recognize how important it is for the genre and establishing both Final Fantasy and Square, but I have the same issue with it that I have with a bunch of old school NES games. I just hit a wall difficulty-wise, and it becomes a drag. I am curious to play the Pixel remaster at some point just to see if any of the quality of life improvements help. I think we could safely say that they do. Definitely do.
I would echo that 100%, Matt. You should play the Pixel remaster.
There's a lot about this that is very, very nice. Absolutely. Maybe it'll change your opinion. Lastly, we've got Nomad from the Retro Wildlands. Here's what Nomad has to say. I played this game on my PSP for a while. Nomad is a big PSP guy. I'm very jealous of his collection. He goes on, it wasn't until the Pixel remaster that I finally finished the game. The quality of life improvements made the game very enjoyable. I can't imagine playing this as originally intended. But despite all that, I've always been drawn to its most simple premise. Pick 4 characters, choose their classes, and off to adventure with you. The journey is what makes this game even somewhat memorable, and as old school RPGs go, I stand by the idea that experiencing this game at least once is borderline essential. That's something that I wanted to touch on too. Let's talk version differences for a sec, Ryan. So,
oh yeah,
we had both mentioned that the NES game is significantly more difficult. I had mentioned to somebody else before I started reading into this that I kind of wished that I could play it on an NES. You know, there are difficulties with that hardware. Most NESs that aren't the top loaders at this point, if they haven't been repaired, are very prone to failure. It's a very finicky console at this point in time. I have outright been recommended by my local store not to purchase the original cooler looking NES and to just get the weird top loader, just simply because there's less moving parts. It's more reliable. It's easier to repair. But that aside, I would love to play this on a CRT, but the version that shipped, the NES version, has a lot of issues. And being that you are very intimate with this game, platonically, I would love to hear some of your thoughts after experiencing the Pixel remaster.
Yeah, so I would say, I don't know if I could say it's essential to play it on the original hardware. I definitely think the Pixel remaster is the better version. The original version is very punishing, but in a way, I don't know, it taught me a lot. You know, it taught me a lot about it's funny to say, but to not get discouraged, right? Like in any video game, you're going to come up against hardship. You're going to hit a wall. Like there's always that moment in a game that's a challenging game where you just don't think you could get over the top of the hill. And I feel like having experienced Final Fantasy from a young age, it just kind of taught me a lot about not being discouraged about a failure. Just try again, you know, and it could get mind numbing if you're trying the same exact moment in the game over and over again. But there was always enough variety in the original version with, you know, character models and enemy types. And I just never experienced a point where I was bored trying to push forward. Now, in the Pixel remaster, there's a lot of corrections they do. There are some enemies that in the original NES version, they'll just turn your whole party to stone. Like almost every attack will turn a party member to stone, and as soon as all 4 of your members are stone, that game's over. And that happens in certain fights if you come against like 8 of a particular enemy. But in the Pixel remaster, they tweaked all of that. So it's just not going to happen as often as it did in the original. And the biggest change, which I took in the original version almost as a strategy, like trying to gauge your opponent's hit points and selecting your targets importantly, because in the Pixel remaster, you could just attack the first enemy. And once that enemy dies, it automatically targets the next one. But in the original NES version, that was not the case. If you had targeted an enemy with multiple heroes and that enemy died, let's say, when the first hero attacked, your next 3 attacks were just null and void. Like they just don't register on a single thing. The original NES version almost had another layer of strategy there because you had to say, okay, I think this one's low on hit points, so I'll use my second guy and third guy and fourth guy to attack the next, you know, enemy character. And you don't really have to worry about that. It also has like auto moves in the more recent version. So if turn-based combat is not something that like tickles your fancy, you could just hit square and it'll auto attack all the enemies. And that's good if you're ever at a point where you have to grind. That kind of eliminates some of the button presses, and it also makes it a little more mindless in my eyes. And I know it's already kind of mindless to begin with, but yeah, those are quality of life improvements, I would call them overall. I think most people would see those as improvements.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you touched on the enemy targeting thing. That was one of the 3 biggest things that I was hoping we could talk about. I've been on record as saying that I feel like a lot of modern JRPG quality of life discussion, I have been on record saying that I feel like a lot of that is synonymous with making the games easier. Mm-hmm. The example I always go back to, and I remember thinking this when this game came out, is in Pokemon when they made the EXP share just kind of something you got automatically. And so even if you fought a random battle with just your starter, your whole team would get some experience. And I distinctly remember, even as a kid, thinking that took some of the strategy out. Of course, like grinding, there is something meditative about grinding. There's something very zen about it to get into that routine. It's, mindless, you could say, if you're feeling cynical, but I think it is strategic. How much time do you want to devote to getting this Pokemon up a level or this party member up a level? That's because that's the strategy of JRPGs, right? It's the difficulty isn't in pressing buttons. The difficulty and the strategy is in the numbers game. It's it's a Microsoft Excel.
It's min-maxing.
Yeah, exactly. And the EXP share, I remember thinking like, oh, that kind of spoils that. But there are some quality of life improvements here that I would say almost universally, I think folks would agree that it makes the game better. That not auto attack. I mean, that is convenient, but I would think that the targeting of a dead enemy and then missing, I would think that was cool and strategic for the first 2 hours, and then it would drive me insane afterwards.
Yeah.
And I would be very mad the rest of my playthrough. I can almost guarantee it. That is something I'm glad that they took out, personally.
I think most people would agree with you. Absolutely.
Oh, for sure. Especially if you're, wasting some of your magic, which, magic works differently in this game than it does in later installments. That would be very, very annoying. Especially because, like you said, you kind of have to guess. You have to guesstimate your enemy's HP.
Right, but it almost made some things more meaningful because when you get those second level spells that can attack everyone, it was like a bigger upgrade. It was like more of a moment to get those spells. You know what I mean?
Oh, totally. Even if we can agree that this QOL improvement is a net positive, there's still some stuff that you lose. And that sense of satisfying strategy, that'll always be there, even if it's a really annoying mechanic. It feels satisfying if you just guess, like, okay, there are 3 enemies left. I'm going to attack 3 of them. Like, I'm going to have my 3 guys attack the 3 enemies, and boom, 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 they fall in a row. That's so satisfying. Even in later titles where, you would just auto refocus your attack, right? It's still very satisfying. Even more so in these games where the stakes are higher. That's one that's specific to combat. There's another that's specific to combat, and that is the party formation.
Yeah.
Now, I remember playing this game whenever I was first starting out. I sent a screenshot in our Discord, and you had commented something to the effect that you were shocked that I had my white mage on the front lines.
Yeah, I was like, what are you doing with your white mage up there, buddy?
And yeah, you were like, has this guy ever played a Final Fantasy before? What's his problem? What's his deal?
I was like, geez, get a load of this guy.
Yeah, change the channel. Get this guy off the stage. Well, and you had said that, and I was like, what is he talking about? And the first thing that I thought of, I was thinking, does he mean like the row? In later games, you could put them in the front row, the back row. And I was like, did I miss that? And I played around with it, and no, there's no rows in this. What I learned that you had already known was the party formation in the original really dictated which of your party members would get targeted by enemies. Now, I didn't, I'm sure there exist stats out there on this, but if your fighter, let's say, is in the top position, closest to the top of the screen, he's significantly more likely to get targeted by enemies. Let's say, just to throw out a number, let's say 50% most likely to get targeted. Versus the person that's on the very bottom, they are least likely to get targeted. And you can strategize in that way. So your tanky characters, like your fighter, should take that top spot. And the more fragile characters, like I think it's the ninja that has the lowest HP stat in the game, or the white mage, should be closer to the bottom. And it's strategic in that way. Now, I don't think the Pixel Remaster has this feature because I played with this over and over. First of all, I didn't notice that pattern. I feel like that's something you would notice, right? And I didn't notice it, but I played around with it to see if the damage scaling was different, and I really don't think it is. If I'm wrong, I'll put an edit in. If I'm wrong, please correct me in the Discord, etc., etc. But I don't think this is in here.
So you're saying that the person being at the head of your party didn't get attacked more often? You didn't run into that?
I don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I did miss this pattern. I really don't think I noticed that.
I played 2 playthroughs for this, actually, because there's a challenge I've always wanted to do where, like, you could play as, they call them monks in the Pixel Remaster, but in the NES version, they were black belts. There's like a challenge where you could play as a team full of black belts. And that was my second playthrough that I did. My first one, I had like a standard crew. But in both those playthroughs, it felt anyway. And who knows, right? Like this might just be because I have such a history with the NES version that I was seeing something that wasn't there. But it did feel like the head of the party was getting attacked more often. But I mean, it seemed like it was better spread out in this version. I will say that. But I didn't notice it as though it wasn't happening at all. It seemed like maybe instead of 50%, it was more like 30 or 20% more likely, but or 20% of the time. But it was more than 20. What would it be? 25, I guess. So never mind. It was like 125%. Whatever. You get what I'm saying, right? Math.
I get what you're saying. Let's have future Rick step in for a second and see what he could find on this topic. I was indeed mistaken. It seems that this is in the Pixel Remaster, although I could not find any official sources stating this outright. But everything that I've seen online shows that this is in fact in there. And the way it goes is that the first party position, that is the person closest to the top of the screen, has a roughly 50% chance of getting hit by an enemy's single target attack. The second party member, 25% chance, and the third and the fourth, 12.5 per chance. At beat me at sacrifice. Your chances of winning drastically go down. The way I've seen it explained online, and again, I can't verify this, but the way that I've seen it is that an enemy will generate a random number from 1 to 8 if their ability is a single target spell or attack. Slot number 1, the top party member, coincides with numbers 1 through 4. Slot number 2 coincides with 5 and 6. 3 is 7, and 4 is 8. Breaking down into those, as Scott Steiner would say, perchance chances from above. But I'm a genetic freak, and I'm not normal. That's how it works. Apologies for misspeaking. Let's get back to the show. The numbers don't lie. Thank you, Future Rick. Appreciated. You are welcome, and, if I may say so, pretty handsome. Now that he's gone, let's talk development. Let's talk some hard figures. This game was released in December of 1987. You could find the full credits on the wiki, the IMDb, or you could beat the game, but of note, of course, developed and published by Square. Not Square Enix, Squaresoft. Directed, of course, by Hironobu Sakaguchi, produced by Masafumi Miyamoto, art by the legendary Yoshitaka Amano. Sakaguchi was one of the writers, along with Kenji Terada, obviously the composer, Nobuo Uematsu. This dev team started, and this blew me away, with only 4 people. 4 people.
That's incredible.
Yeah, right? Absolutely incredible. Can you imagine a game? I mean, yes, we do, of course, we do see indie games coming out that are done by auteurs today. You know, Lisa the Painful, Undertale, Animal Well, you see it a lot. But times are different now. You know, back then, things were a little less certain. There wasn't like a rhythm to this. It was the wild, wild west, as they call it. That's how they referred to it back then.
Oh, interesting.
You know what else is interesting? The coding on this game was done by a fella named Nasir Gabelli. Possibly Gabelli. I think Gabelli.
Yeah, I would say Gabelli.
I don't often single out programmers on this show, which, you know, maybe this is a shortcoming of mine. But this is a fascinating story. This guy is truly fascinating. He was, by all accounts, something of a wonderkind with programming. Have you heard of this guy before?
No, never heard of him. Never heard of Gabelli.
It is a cool wiki dive. It is a cool rabbit hole to go down for 45 minutes or so. He worked at a company called Sirius Software. His first year, he did 12 computer games. And he would just code in his head and then write the code down before he forgot it. He was that kind of guy. Like, his brain was working on the same computing level as these computers, faster even. He got multiple award nods. Like 6 of his games were nominated. I think 3 won or were featured in a magazine. He was a big deal. He did have his own company briefly. It was a victim of the video game crash of 1983. but he got hired after a chance meeting. I think one of his friends set him up with a meeting with Square. He got hired by the president of Square himself, Masafumi Miyamoto, partly because of his ability, partly because he had a positive reputation. Like, people there knew who he was. Sakaguchi, in particular, was a big fan of his work. And you know what's criminal is I had never heard of this guy before. This is like an unsung hero if I've ever heard of one.
To have such a rich history with this game, and it's the first time I have ever heard that name. So yeah, I appreciate you shouting him out. I feel like I'm learning something.
That's what we do over here. We like to educate the young people. And we just got done talking about how this game shipped with a lot of bugs and inconsistencies. Yes, that is true, but at the same time, this was a different point in history, right? I mean, the QA processes were not nearly as refined and in-depth as they are now. Things were brand new. Just doing this stuff alone was monumental. And the fact that this guy pumped out so much work and did it in his head and just wrote it down as quickly as he could, that is really phenomenal. And you know what's funny is I found a quote from him, I should say, where he was talking about, the process of coding, and he was talking about how he didn't think it was very difficult at all. He said, quote, "I thought it was pretty similar to what I was doing for Apple in the same processor. I already knew just about every machine code for that processor, so as far as coding, it was pretty simple. There was no learning curve."
Wow.
But I'd never seen any role-playing games until Final Fantasy, end quote. And then I have a link to a GameFAQs article that has all the bugs.
That makes it even more impressive. It's true. There was no blueprint to go off of.
Yeah, that's something, recent. You always have to be wary of recency bias, right? And we all fall prey to this. It's natural. We have things so easy now that we don't think about what it was like in the early days of building this stuff. When our phone doesn't work for a minute these days, it's maddening. But back whenever phones were first transitioning out of flip phones into smartphones, it was like if your browser loaded within 45 seconds, that was incredible, right? And, even further back, whenever flip phones started to become very cool and had T9 texting, you were like, oh my God, this is revolutionary, right?
Yeah.
We stand on the shoulders of those who have come before, right, is ultimately what we're saying. And this is the guy on the ground floor, or one of them anyway. And I think that's really impressive. And, we would be remiss not to mention him and celebrate this guy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's true. Can I mention something about the Pixel remasters, unrelated to Jabelli?
Oh, I guess I'll allow it.
Oh, well, thank you. So someone who worked on the original NES version was responsible for bringing the pixel assets to modern displays. Kazuko Shibuya. So she actually worked on the original pixel models of the characters. And they are almost identical in the Pixel remaster, but they actually had to build the images from the ground up for the Pixel remaster based off of how people think they would have looked because of larger range of colors and how CRT TVs distort an image. So I thought that was really interesting. They brought in the OGs to replicate how it would appear on a CRT display. I thought that was pretty cool.
That is very cool. I'm going to put a pin in that because that's going to relate to a conversation I'm excited to have here in a little bit. So pin inserted. Of course, this wouldn't be Final Fantasy I, a discussion about Final Fantasy I, if we didn't have our Doki Doki Mario 2 fact in the episode. I think most people know this by now, but just in case you haven't, that's okay. Square's games had a lack of success. They were not in the most amazing of financial straits at this time, and they were going to take one more stab at it with Final Fantasy. And there was this rumor that, this was their last hurrah, and Final Fantasy was this romantic title, and, it was their final go, and it was so successful. It's a true underdog story, right? We love underdog stories. It's almost natural, but this is simply not so. This is from the Gooch himself. Here's what Sakaguchi says. He says, quote, "There's an urban legend that the final in Final Fantasy meant that this was our last project. While we were having some hard times back then, the truth is that as long as the title could be shortened to FF, any word would have sufficed. It was initially going to be Fighting Fantasy, but there was already a board game out with that same name. End quote. So it was a rights issue. What would you have named it? Anything with FF? What are you going with?
Oh, man. I don't know. Flogging Fantasy?
I like it. Flogging Fantasy. That's a good one. I'm more partial to Firestone Fantasy, but they didn't consult me. I would be a rich man if that were the case.
They really should have brought you in on that.
Flogging Firestone. That's what they would have called me.
Yeah. So, like, I actually believed this urban legend for some time. I think many people did, right? And
me too, of course.
It is. It's such like a romantic idea. Like this company was, oh, here's our passion project, and we leave you with this, and then it succeeds beyond their wildest dreams. And it'd be kind of cool if it was true.
And it fits into I don't know whether this is true. Again, disclaimer, I am not a Japanese scholar. I don't live in Japan, etc. But it fits into what I have heard is the difference between the Japanese and American sort of internalized work ethic, right? In America, and to be clear, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this. We think it's healthy to know when to quit. We see that as a way of like treating oneself with respect. But I have heard, and if I'm wrong, I apologize, but I have heard that in Japan, it's more, the culture there is more so respecting yourself is seeing it through and proving to yourself that you are worthy of going through it. Is that true? I have no idea. But it adds to that underdog sort of narrative. Mm-hmm. It would be so cool if that were true. And, if I were Sakaguchi, I would probably, if somebody didn't ask me in an official interview, if they were just chatting at a bar, I'd be like, yeah, of course that's true.
Right, exactly. Oh, yeah, man, we thought it was over. We thought we were done for.
And then that paycheck came in.
And now we're on Final Fantasy 16 and so many more. so many more.
Yeah, I had a dream that one day Clive would be in Tekken. And I said to myself, I'm going to get Clive in Tekken. And Harada said, what's Tekken? And he said, don't worry. In 16 years, you'll understand.
It's a little more than that, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Final Fantasy, a lot of us, especially in the West, might think of Final Fantasy as the granddaddy. This wasn't true. It is a progenitor, but it's not the progenitor. Dragon Quest was already really quite successful in Japan. And ultimately, that was part of what ended up convincing Square to give Sakaguchi permission to make a JRPG. This was something that he wanted to do for a long time, but they kept saying, this isn't a good business move. Look at where our finances are now. It's not a great idea. And to that end, when this game did release, it didn't do like amazing, but Sakaguchi was out there promoting it himself. He was doing a lot of the PR. He was hustling. Early grind set.
Yeah, you got to go out there and take it sometimes, I wonder what Sakaguchi's morning routine was.
Ice bath,
yeah,
ice plunge, right. A cool 12 miles, emails.
12 miles with my weighted vest.
Of course. The battle system, it's now classic, was designed by Hiroyuki Ito, who had never played a JRPG prior to this. Incredible. American football and pro sports were an inspiration, what with the lineups and calling the plays, which I think is just so cool.
Yeah, that's I had never heard that either. I could see it, especially with the turn-based combat, right? Like it definitely relates to calling plays and like seeing how it goes. It is incredible from today's standards to think a lot of these, people who worked on the game had never played a JRPG, but it was a different time. Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's not the first JRPG out there, right? Like there were successful franchises already in Japan, but at the time it wasn't the plethora of options that we have today, right? So I could see some of the people who worked on it not having that experience with the genre.
Now, if you're like me, you might be thinking like, oh, I would have, surely they would have been inspired by D&D, not football. Like what are you talking about? And I am proud to say that I read literally 2 sentences ahead of where I was when I wrote that question, and I answered my own question. That's how you do research, folks. D&D was definitely a thing in Japan, and they were inspired by D&D. Akitoshi Kawazu, who was working with Ito on the battle system, did push for a D&D influence. You know, things like zombies being weak to fire, fire monsters being weak to ice, things like that. They said that Japanese RPGs were ignoring these kinds of relationships, and Kawazu found this irritating. Now, here's where I wish that I would have played a Dragon Quest. I've never played a single Dragon Quest, so like, I trust him, obviously. I have no reason not to believe what I read, but I had no idea that they were just ignoring that kind of thing. I mean, recency bias, I just assumed that was something that came out the womb, so to speak.
Right. So I think Dragon Warrior, right, was released in the US, and yeah, Dragon Quest existed, and I don't have the experience with that franchise. I didn't play any of the NES titles for it, but I would have been frustrated if I cast an ice spell on a fire monster and it didn't do extra damage. So I am glad that my experience came from Final Fantasy.
I would have started wearing out the word gaslight so much, even all the way back then. You're gaslighting me to tell me that this monster made of literal ice doesn't take fire any differently than it takes electricity. Get out of here. Now, I will say, that's not perfect in this game, especially with some of the fiends. You would think, oh, okay, this is a water fiend. Let me hit it with electricity. Well, yeah, you thought, pal. They're resistant to everything. That's still a thing here.
It's cool to see it mentioned, though, because it clicked. Even as a kid, it clicked. Like the attack that when you look at the design of an enemy, the attack you think will work will probably work better than like others, which is neat.
That's true. It's not like it's a blanket, statuses don't matter, but it's not as intuitive as you would think today. Weirdly, they kind of swung back that way with Final Fantasy XVI. They did away with a lot of those elemental affinities, and I know it drove a lot of people mad. It drove me mad from day one. I was complaining about that quite a bit. Oh, that'll be wild if we ever talk about 16 on this show, man. I don't know if I can.
I played through it. I'll say that much.
I did too, and it starts so strong. I didn't hate it. I just didn't like it either, you know?
I'm with you. I agree. I don't hate it. I didn't like it, but that demo sold me so hard on that game, and I feel like I was lied to.
Yeah, it wrote a check that it just did not have the funds to cash.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk visual design. We kind of brushed up against this a little bit.
Yeah, I jumped the gun, Rick. I jumped the gun. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. We call that a tease.
Oh, yeah. No, totally planned.
I think it would be more interesting to talk about the original version. I mean, the Pixel Remaster, don't get me wrong. The Pixel Remaster looks beautiful, but it does look pretty similar to the other Pixel Remasters 1 through 6. Not identical, but pretty similar. You can tell that it's of the same sort of family. Whereas looking at Final Fantasy 1, even versus 4, certainly versus 6, there's a clear progression there. But even all the way back to FF1 on the NES, I think these just look so charming and good. I love how these look. The battle screen literally looks like a D&D table put onto a screen, like the best representation of that. Little dioramas of guys walking around a town. I will always love this style.
Yeah, no argument here. I find it very endearing, and the different kind of perspectives that you get, as you mentioned, in the town, in the battle screen, as you're walking around the wilds. And as a kid, it felt vast. It felt big because you would see the different backgrounds based on the environment that you were traversing at the time. And like, I just remember that hitting me as being so cool to see and so like engrossing. It really brought you into the world. And it's funny to say that now, because if you look at this game, it's just, it's a lot of black screen in that battle screen, but it was those little details that really stood out to me and just made it feel, a little more real.
All right, I'm going to unpin that pin that I had stuck in earlier. So you had mentioned that, it's a lot of black screen. You mentioned the Pixel Remaster kind of amped up the color because of the limitations of the past. Would you say, when you were playing this as a younger fella, a younger kid, would you say that your imagination played a large part in what you were seeing? In other words, when you played this, were you also imagining something grander in your head?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's funny because this is by today's standards, a small game, but at the time it was a huge world. And those battles, there's not a lot there, right? Like if you attack, your guy steps up and he goes like, moves his arm twice and steps back. But, when it was evaded, you'd picture the enemy like dodging it and coming back at you, especially if they attacked you the next turn. And so it was very turn-based. It was very like plotting the combat. But yeah, 100%. My childhood imagination filled in every blank. It was cool.
Now, am I correct in assuming that you, like me, kind of miss that?
Yeah, of course I miss that.
Don't get me wrong. Like Final Fantasy, let's go back to 16. It's amazing what they were able to do with that visual engine. That game, spectacle is that game's number one adjective. It's that game's number one trait. Mm-hmm. But that being said, there is something that's lost whenever the game, the movie, or whatever is presenting you with everything that's there and just saying you don't need to do anything else. Just observe, and this is it. You lose something. You lose that autonomy of the fiction when it no longer lives in your imagination, right? Like these guys on the field, your characters, they're not actually standing in a line taking turns, and the goblins across the field aren't standing in a line taking turns. That's just the representation. But it's a representation of a fiction, and it's inviting the player to use their imagination and say like, oh, okay, this is what you're seeing, but the adventure is up to you. It's the same as reading a book or seeing a play, right? Like we know they're not standing on a stage. We know that they're not in the same space, even though the background, changed. We know they're not in a different space, excuse me. There's something to be said about the magic of the imagination that has been lost now that games have become so graphically intense and fidelity focused that we lose that sort of theater of the imagination that we had back then. There was nothing, I used to do this all the time, man. Like even with something like Final Fantasy IX, which by all accounts looks really good, I would still imagine in my head like, oh man, Zidane's running across the field and he jumped in front of Garnet to save her, and oh man, they almost got him right there. Or even playing like Smash Brothers, I would fight against the computers and imagine little scenarios in my head like, oh, he's my enemy, but I have to save my friend, and because he just beat him in the last match. You know what I mean? That imagination, that theater of the imagination is not as prevalent anymore, and it's part of the reason why I like this era, like pre-2000s JRPGs, is because you can just immerse yourself in that. I love it so much. And that's not to say that modern games are bad. They definitely aren't, but I do miss it. I do miss this kind of thing.
I definitely think there's something missing, and it beautifully said, by the way. And I'm glad you brought this up, but I think, another good comparison would be one of the things that inspired Final Fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like
totally.
A lot can be filled in by your imagination. I do think that there is benefit to that. I absolutely agree with you. And I will say though, like that right there, like what you're talking about is why I played through annually. It was like I kept wanting to get that back. And I feel like probably on some level subconsciously it was because more and more games were those big in-your-face games. You had your show not tell kind of thing going on, movement in gaming, and it's more prevalent now than ever. But also it was almost bittersweet because every time I went and revisited this game, it was like a little bit of that was lost, right? And I don't know if it was because I was getting older. I mean, this sounds pretty cliche, but like getting more and more disenchanted and like losing that part of me, right? To fill in those blanks and to really engross myself in a world that like my mind had to fill in. So I think that is eventually why I stopped playing it. Like I lost a bit of that ability, but given the gap between playthroughs and playing it for this show, it was refreshing. And I was able to really experience it in that degree again, in some ways.
No, you're right on the money. It's, you know why it's cliche is because it's true, right? I say it all the time on this show. Life's greatest truths are the ones that are the least sexy and exciting, right? As we get older, I think of this like a muscle. As you get older, if you don't flex it all the time, it's going to kind of wither and atrophy. It gets harder as you age. Like I have a much harder time reading fiction now, imagining the scenes in my head. It's not a vivid, like, Technicolor film in there anymore like it was when I was a kid.
Right.
I distinctly remember reading the second Harry Potter book and practically seeing the film play out in my mind. But now it's more abstract visuals and visual representations in my brain. It's not the same. It does get harder, absolutely. And I can relate, man. It's every year it gets a little tougher, but that's all the more reason to embrace it and try to work that muscle, because we can keep it. We could keep it as we get older. We just have to work a little bit. We have to work to maintain that childlike innocence and wonder, right? That gets handily beaten.
Stomped on.
Straight up. Yeah. Like I know we're laughing, but it's true. Like that really, especially in Western cultures, America, it gets beaten out of you pretty hard.
It does. And I am laughing about it. I'm laughing because it's more of a nervous, sad laugh than anything else.
Self-preservation. If we don't laugh about it, we're liable to completely unravel.
Right.
And that's not good.
True. Absolutely true.
So we talked a little bit about mechanics. We could talk about them some more here. You've got your 4-party setup, and I am very curious to hear what your favorite party is, because I did not make good choices here. Here are your choices starting out. You've got a fighter, a thief, a monk, aka a black belt, a red mage, a white mage, and a black mage. And each of these can level up to a warrior, a ninja, a master, I think it's called.
Yeah, I believe so.
And then red, white, and black wizards. So what is your go-to party? You mentioned that you did a challenge run of all monks, which I understand starts out difficult and can end just out of control. But what is your go-to party for this game? Do you have one?
Yeah, I absolutely have one. When I was a kid, a dumb child who didn't know better, I would pick a fighter, a red mage, a white mage, and a black mage. But then I slowly learned that the red mage is actually kind of garbage. So I went fighter, white mage, black mage. And that is a pretty easy playthrough compared to most party comps. I will say the all monk party was not easy. They are the epitome of a glass cannon, even if you scale them properly without using like weapons and armor. They are very much a glass cannon. And while you can dole out some pretty incredible numbers, you can't take a ton of damages, especially from the bosses.
So what did you say that garbage party was? Red mage, white mage, black mage, and fighter?
I didn't say it was a garbage party. I just said I found out that the red mage, while it's kind of an all-rounder, it's not a good pick. A red mage, in my opinion, is not a good pick for any party.
Well, I'll have you know, my party was a red mage, a white mage, a black mage, and a monk. I did pick a monk.
A monk is like a bad idea as your physical attack dealer.
Yeah,
if you're only going to have one.
This was not a good party composition. I mean, I chose the red mage solely because I think they look really cool, and in theory, I think they're very cool, but they aren't like very good at anything. And now I will say, towards the end, I was able to like have them cast Saber and Haste.
Yeah.
And they were dealing okay damage. They were pretty good, and they could cast Cures in a pinch. But this was a really difficult lineup. I should have went with a fighter. I don't know why I didn't pick. I picked a red mage because I think they look cool. White mage is just my favorite class, like period. Black mage. I mean, how are you not going to pick a black mage, right?
Yeah.
And
that's
then,
like sacrilegious.
I think I just picked monk because like I didn't want to be basic and pick a fighter. But that's kind of the strategy because fighters are broken in this game.
Fighters are great in this game. They really are. And you learn some magic even later in the game, which is like, forget it.
Yeah, they functionally can become a paladin, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
I had trouble. I had to grind much more than I thought. I was, but weirdly, what that did was create an inconsistency in the playthrough where bosses would be pretty challenging, and then everything else around it was just like auto attack, and I'm good. You know?
Yeah.
If I were to go back and redo this, I would probably honestly just either swap just the monk or the monk and the red mage with like 2 fighters, or maybe like a fighter and a thief or something. It was tough. It was tough.
Thief is probably the class I have played the least of. I just never messed with a thief because I was always like, man, if I'm going to go thief, like the red mage does some spells, and like the red mage does do decent damage. They don't do terrible damage, right? If you have a good weapon equipped to them.
It scales off pretty quickly though. Like in the beginning of the game, early, middle, like pretty solid. And then the farther you go, it's just like, well, everybody else can just do everything better than them.
Yeah, once you get to like level 4, 5, and 6 spells, he's just not learning them. Like he just can't learn them, and his attack is not near what a fighter would be. Yeah, I agree. He does kind of sink in that middle game.
I will say though, they did attempt to do some balancing with the warrior, the fighter. Being that they're so powerful, their equipment is significantly more expensive, which was funny to me. I was a millionaire in this game. I had more gil than I knew what to do with.
I got to the point in my second playthrough, my all monk playthrough, because like they don't use weapons or armor. So what am I going to buy? They can't use magic spells. What am I going to buy? So I literally got to the point where I was opening treasure chests, and it's like, you can't carry any more gil.
I will say though, I did read plenty of Reddit posts where folks were like, yeah, it wasn't like this in the early days, like on the NES. Like this is all the remastered stuff, the GBA, PSP, Pixel Remaster. It's just not the same. Like it's so easy. You could just buy 99 potions and high potions and ethers. And so I don't think this is how it would have been back. Well, I mean, why am I speculating? You're here. Was this how it was?
I mean, later in the game, you would be able to buy 99 potions was not something I never achieved on the NES version. You know, like that's definitely a point I got to. Now, in the Pixel Remaster, you could get 99 of every single item. Like literally 99 antidotes, 99 gold needles. I mean, everything. Phoenix Downs. Like, I did that in my second playthrough, and that is ridiculous. So no, it was never quite like to that level in the original NES game. It was definitely like eventually later in the game you'd have enough where you could have 99 potions. Sure, that's not a problem. They're not that much, gil, but it's very much pronounced in the Pixel Remaster how much money you are making.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot. It took some challenge out for sure. That's one thing that I would be curious to try a different version of, but maybe we'll see. We already talked about party lineup. Well, Future Rick informed us of whether we were right or wrong. You all heard him. We heard him.
We heard him. Thanks, Future Rick.
There's just no reason to say what he already said, Mana works differently. MP works differently in this game, which outside of this, I will say, outside of this, at the core of this is like the Final Fantasy DNA. Pre-ATB, sure, but this is what the genre always was. It's pre-ATB, but you've got your fight, you've got your magic, you've got your items. Now, you don't have special skills like you do in future titles, but they kind of got into that rhythm early on, and they knew they stumbled onto something good here. And I mean, again, D&D, D&D and football, it's kind of a match made in heaven, if you ask me. A great Saturday night. I guess that would be Sunday afternoon, really.
I actually play football role-playing games, so yeah, totally. I'm the star quarterback.
Yeah, every once in a while you run into one of those guys like, Madden's Madden's an RPG because you play the role of John Madden or whoever.
You adjust your stats. You play the role of John Madden. I love that. Yes, that's what you do in every Madden game, Rick.
Yeah, that's your protagonist.
I love that.
And he's the new high schooler. That's how every Madden opens up.
What's up, my fellow kids?
Are you the new guy, John Madden-san? Anyway, MP works a little differently in this game, and I kind of like it. It makes strategizing much more interesting because you've got, as you said earlier, Ryan, you've got magic levels. Cure is going to be level 1, for example. Fire is level 1, but level 2 might be Thunder. Level 2 might be a heal for your whole party. And you only get certain number of uses for each of these levels at a time. Those increase as your class increases and as you level up. But once you run out of uses until you use an ether, which by the way only gives you one use back. So like, yeah, you're going to have 99, but it's like ether doesn't give you a ton of MP back. Once you're out of uses, you can't use any of those spells anymore. So for example, I think one of the last levels that I got with my white mage had full life, holy, and one other thing. I don't think it was Kiraga. I think it was Diaga or something. Diaja. But at any rate, they were all on a row, and I had like 6 uses of them. Once those 6 were gone, I couldn't use any of those anymore. Holy, full life, or Diaja. So you do have to strategize, and that brings an interesting wrinkle to like longer dungeons, because you have to think like, do I really want to waste this strong spell here? Like, yeah, my physical attacks are kind of weak against this enemy or this mini boss. I could use a spell, but then what if I need it against the big boss later? Do I have enough time to get out of here? You know, in the early days, you can't just turn off battles and walk out. Like, what do I do? That adds a really cool wrinkle that I personally love.
Yeah, I agree. And some of those dungeons are pretty large, and like you're in it, and you got to also weigh, can I make it out? Can I make it out of here if I need to go, you know, pop a cabin outside the entrance? I think it's neat. I find it frustrating in other RPGs when, you know, more recent ones, when you're left with like 4 mana and you can't cast any spell, and it's like, why'd they do that? So I like that this is like definitive, right? It's like, hey, you get so many uses of these spells too. You're not ever going to have leftover, you know, magic points that you can't use. I like this system a whole lot for Magic. I think it just fits really well. And it, as you said, it adds to the strategy too. And I don't think it was used after this. Spoiler alert, I never played Final Fantasy II, so I'm not sure. But I think this might be the only Final Fantasy they used it in.
I've never played 2 either. I'm very intimidated because all I ever hear is how bad it is. One of our Discord regulars, Whooper, was trying to play through all of the Final Fantasies at one point, and 2 just like they just did not want to continue. And I'm sure the Pixel Remaster smooths some of that out, but even still, like I've heard that folks really don't like how the stat levels increase, or the ability levels. I don't know.
I plan on playing through it, but we'll see how that goes.
I do like this MP system, though. It reminds me of like, I mean, it feels more tabletop inspired, to be sure. It kind of makes me think of like, you know, maybe a mage has to use like consumables, like a consumable object of some sort that helps transmute their power in some way, you know, and they just have to refill it. I don't know. It kind of makes me think of that. The trade-off is, though, like, you know, with MP, if you pop an ether, now you've got 75 MP, and you could use Thundaga like twice, or you could use, you know, fire like 12 times, right?
Right. But it does, you know, when you come across a big group of enemies too, it's like, man, I could just wipe all these dudes out if I use one, you know, Thundaga, right? And it's that sort of extra level of thought that adds some depth to the combat, where you're like, well, I want the XP. I'm not just going to run from this fight, but I might need this for the boss. But you know what? Screw it. I'm using it, and I'm going to wipe these 12 dudes out in one turn instead of taking the damage and then using all my heals. And, you know, it's good. It's good to have that sort of, that extra level of strategy in the game.
And even though it would be looked at today as like primitive, it does give you that satisfaction whenever things line up. You know, you're down to your last flare, and you're at this boss, and you don't know if it's going to do it, but it does. It takes him down, and you don't have any ethers left, so good thing too. It gives you those really satisfying moments that, you know, QOL, quality of life improvements, give us a lot of pleasure, but we lose that last like 5% that really lets you feel it in the face of that kind of adversity.
Yeah, it's like your 4th and goal on the 1 yard line, and all right, enough football.
And John Madden-san comes down and kicks a field goal.
Dang it, John.
One thing that I think is good even for today in this game is the music and the sound. The Pixel Remaster's done away with some of the sound things, like in the NES version. Again, I didn't play it, but I did watch as much as I could. Every time a dialogue box popped up, you would get this little kind of sound. You don't get that anymore, which is a shame because it's super annoying.
Yeah, I have fond memories of that sound effect.
The music in this game, which by the way, I was peppering in both the remastered version from the Pixel Remaster and the original NES tracks, if you haven't noticed, throughout here. I am a big fan of this soundtrack. I think it's really terrific. When you played through this, do you prefer the NES or the Pixel Remaster?
All right, so when the Pixel Remaster came out, there was a big to-do about the font. Do you remember this? The font and the music. I don't know if you're oh, yeah. And I have to say, I didn't pick it up day one. I picked it up maybe 6 months ago. So I was aware of that whole conversation happening, and I was like, man, how silly for people to get like, and I'm a big fan of the original. I was like, people getting bent out of shape over that. That's weird. And then I turned it on and I saw the font and I was like, ooh, this doesn't feel good. So I changed the font to the original, pixel-based font because it really did stand out to me. And I hate to say that, to pile it on, right? But it makes me feel like what people had to say was valid, and I didn't consider that in my initial judgment. But the music too. Like the orchestrated music kind of threw me off, and I was like, this doesn't feel like Final Fantasy to me. So I put it back to the pixel tracks. And my second playthrough, when I went to all monk team, I did do the orchestrated music, but I didn't change the font back. The font will not receive my forgiveness.
I think the problem with the font is it looks very lifeless. It looks too much like, what's that one dog shit font that everything defaults to? Arial, Arial.
Yes.
Terrible font. It's way too rounded. It doesn't have the stature and the angularity that Times New Roman has, or even Courier. Like, get Arial out of here. That's a garbage font. I never want it. And every time I open a freaking Google Doc, it's Google's like, Arial? And I'm like, no. The only Arial I want, sir, is from Disney's hit movie, The Little Mermaid.
Oh, wow. Oh, Ariel the Little Mermaid. Yeah, I was thinking the System of a Down song.
Also classic. Also very good.
Ariel's, yeah.
I was thinking of my ex-girlfriend. Just kidding. I haven't talked to her in decades. I agree with you. There are a few tracks in here that work really well with the reorchestration. And by the way, like, Uematsu oversaw the orchestration. So it's not like this was done by some schlub. He did it, but this is something that I talk about all the time on this show, is creativity is enhanced by limitations, right? When you're teaching a new jazz student to solo, how to improvise, you don't just say, okay, play whatever you want. You start off small. You say, okay, you're gonna play just the third or just the root and focus on the rhythm. Okay, now you can add the seventh in. Okay, now you can add the full scale. Okay, now we're going to add 2 scales. It's a gradual process, but having that limitation enhances your creativity. You're forced to think within the box and push up against the boundaries of it. That oftentimes, I don't know if you've experienced this, but that oftentimes to me is where I feel the most creative. Not just when I'm dropped into an empty field and say, okay, the sky's the limit. Like, that's why Minecraft can oftentimes when I would try to play when I was younger, felt really overwhelming, because it's like, yeah, you could do anything, but God, that's anything, like, give me some structure.
Yeah, where do I start? No, I get that for sure. I do like that there is some open-endedness here, but yeah, structure helps for sure.
Uematsu very famously composed the prelude in like an hour, maybe like 45 minutes. He did it very, very quickly.
We just did an episode on our favorite title music, and spoiler alert, this was my number one.
For good reason too. It's simple in the best possible way. Its simplicity gives it a timeless feel, and even without the orchestrations, you can kind of tell that it's meant to be some sort of either a harp or a keyboard instrument.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, because I feel like there's an 80s song in there, right? With like the keyboard sound. I feel like it's that 80s fantasy, like it's perfect. It's perfect for this game.
It's funny you say that. I can hear progressive metal in this more than I do like 80s. Like it's one of the dungeon themes. It's like
oh, absolutely. That's like rock. Yeah, that's some rock sound right there. I know which one you're talking about.
I mean, even if you didn't know that Uematsu plays in the Black Mages and the Earthbound Papas, like that are functionally Final Fantasy prog rock groups, like you hear that and I just think Liquid Tension Experiment or Dream Theater, you know, which I would love to put side by side to this, but I just got an email today about my Tony Hawk episode getting taken off Spotify.
Aww.
So,
boo.
But just imagine, you know, instead of me going like it's Acid Rain being played by John Petrucci, Liquid Tension Experiment. Great group.
I was meaning the prelude specifically with that like 80s fantasy sound to it, but yes, totally. Absolutely. Like there are some pretty inventive songs on this soundtrack.
And it's, well, let's stick with the prelude for a second. I think that one works no matter how you orchestrate it within reason. Like, it sounds amazing. It opened this episode as the Pixel Remaster with the harp, and it sounds ethereal and serene and heavenly. It feels like home, right? And there's nothing wrong with the NES version. It's a little more abrasive because of the sound chip, but it's not like it's like perpetual triangle waves, you know? It doesn't sound that in your face. And it's just arpeggios. That's all it is. It's giving you the harmony through the arpeggios. There's not really a melody. There's kind of a melody in there, but it's more about the outlining the harmony like you would in a keyboard invention or something. It's very cool. I tell you what, though, throughout my entire playthrough, I kept the NES music. I did not want... I'm not really a big fan overall of the reorchestration, but the main title theme, where it's just two voices in counterpoint, basically, with one voice low in the bass, and that's it. And it's just this beautiful melody that da 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 da. That's in a different key than what's playing right now, but it's. I was astounded at. This goes back to the imagination thing, right? Like listening to the NES track of it. It's just two voices and a bass, a basso continuo and two voices, and yet, in my brain, I'm able to imagine it as this full orchestral suite of sound, even though I'm just hearing three sound waves, really two of them and then one that's really down in there because it just doesn't come through very well as much as the other two. But I could still hear it. And I mean, Uematsu wasn't the only one doing it that way. Everybody was. But it's a testament to how well he was able to write for that specific hardware, that you're able to just let it bloom inside of you into a full orchestra just by hearing this simple melodic sound chip. It's really fantastic, and the melody is beautiful. I love this melody. I love it so much. It's so good.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I can't talk music with you with the same.
Yeah, you can.
Discretion that you have, but I do want to mention the town theme too. I think it's a really good town theme. You had posted a question on your Discord of favorite town themes, and I was like, man, I really want to say Final Fantasy 1.
That's the one that's ya da 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 da. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's
There's
beautiful.
That boom 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 in the back, like, you know, in the background going too. There's like that little like playful like, yeah, it's really good.
You can just hear the string pizzicato, even though it's just the NES sound chip. It's really beautiful, and I love what Uematsu is able to pull out of his listeners, because, you know, it is the listeners too. It's our brain, and it's our ears and the thing between them, right? The brain that is allowing us to let this bloom in our minds. But Uematsu's taking advantage of that, and it's really beautiful. You know what other tune I really liked was the inn and the shop theme. That kind of waltz. Mm-hmm. I'm a sucker for a good waltz. You know, I'm not a. I don't want to give the wrong impressions that I'm always listening to Strauss. All right, I know that's what you're all thinking, and let me just say, let me get in front of that. Let me clear the record. I'm not always listening to Strauss.
That's exactly what someone who always listens to Strauss would say.
I know, right? Yeah, no Johann for me, Ricard or nothing. Not really. I don't have a problem with either Strauss, but I do love this. You know, it's very whimsical and it doesn't take itself super seriously. None of this music really takes itself too seriously. Not really. Honestly, the prelude and the main title theme kind of do the most.
Yeah. I would say, too, I hope you like the battle music, because you'll be hearing a lot of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's you've got that one track, and like,
it's a loop. It is a loop.
And it's fine. Like, it doesn't, you know, it's of its time, but
yeah.
it's still classic. Like, you get that bass line all the way back then.
Right. That do.
I like it. Nice. I like it just fine. I don't fault them for not having more. They probably didn't have the storage or the memory to have much more.
Right.
But it's cool.
And I think the sound effects were tweaked for the Pixel remaster. We could talk about that later. I don't want to interrupt your music talk. But
No, they absolutely were tweaked. I mean, I don't have a list of them, but I mean, you pull them up side by side, and it's clear as day.
There's more variety in the sound effects in the Pixel remaster. Like, hits register differently. There's like squishy sounds to some of them, and you know, in the NES version, it was very much just like the one, and like, you did it, you hit a guy.
Yeah. Overall, though, this is a really, I really like this track. There's at least one other that I think I referenced a little bit later, but speaking of later, let's talk a little bit about our gameplay experience.
Sure.
So like I said up top, this isn't going to be a standard episode. This section is going to be pretty brief, in all honesty. The story, and I say this as a pro, this isn't a negative on this game. The story does not involve a lot of thinking. They do something at the end that kind of turns it into one of those situations where it's like, okay, I don't need to think about this. This is just a fantasy. It's about having fun. But by and large, you know, you're essentially going on a series of quests and dungeons and sort of puzzles, right? You get one item to give to somebody, they give you another item that you give to someone else, they give you another item that you can use to get through. It's not a series of story beats. So I don't think we're going to talk about it that way, but we can talk about the opening. Which I like quite a bit. It opens up, and by the way, I took these notes using the Pixel Remaster text. It's relocalized. It's a little different in the old one. I have a comparison here in a minute. But we open up, we get our little scroll, which reminded me a lot of Dungeons & Dragons. I could just picture a good DM explaining this to the table, you know, as he sets the scene. You get your opening text. It says, "The world lies shrouded in darkness. The winds die, the seas rage, the earth decays, but the people believe in a prophecy, patiently awaiting its fulfillments. When darkness veils the world, 4 warriors of light shall come. After a long journey, 4 young travelers did at last appear, and in the hand of each was clutched a crystal." You're right away kind of set outside, like that's the background. You're 4 warriors of destiny, and you just kind of showed up together. That's it. Like, you don't need this. This isn't a story that's meant to be analyzed, you know? It's a D&D campaign that you would play with your friends over a weekend, you know? It's just for fun.
Yeah.
But you are the 4 warriors.
It is a little different than the NES version, though.
It is a little different. I did not... Do you have it written down?
I do.
Oh, would you like to read it?
I mean, if people want to hear me read it, I can, definitely. So I've never been a dungeon master in Dungeons & Dragons, so please bear with me. But the world is veiled in darkness. The wind stops. The sea is wild, and the earth begins to rot. The people wait. Their only hope, a prophecy. When the world is in darkness, 4 warriors will come. After a long journey, 4 young warriors arrive, each holding an orb.
Orb is in all caps, and I don't know why, but that gets a chuckle out of me.
An orb, I should have said.
Yeah, it's not so different that it doesn't set the mood. Like, it does fine, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's interestingly tweaked it at all, in my opinion.
It does read a little more naturally in the updated one, but it's, I mean, no points knocked off, you know what I mean?
For sure.
One thing that's interesting, you had mentioned this way at the beginning, and I wanted to make sure I touched on it. You had mentioned Mario, and like stories of the day, contemporary stories weren't as deep or sprawling as this one. By today's standards, yeah, this is nothing special. But back then, stories in games weren't doing this. Don't get me wrong, like I don't have the time to do a historical research on what games were out and what they were doing, because I'm going to be honest with you, I'm 30 or 40 years old. I don't have time for this. But one thing this game does differently immediately is, the classic trope is you save the princess or the damsel. That's what you do in a story. And that's the final, the game ends when Mario finds his princess in the castle. This game starts with that, and that's kind of subversive.
Yes. No, it is subversive. It frames it as though this is the first thing you have to do, right? Like, obviously it frames it that way, but you don't know the first time you play it that if it's going to be the whole thing, right? Like, if it's going to be you arrive at that first place to save the princess, and it is literally the answer you get is your princess is in another castle. So it is an interesting way to start the game, but definitely not what the story of this game is about.
And I think that's really cool. That's something that I took for granted when I first played this. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, let's get on with the story. But trying to put myself back in the shoes of, 1987, 1989, I think that would have been not shocking. Maybe shocking is not the right word, but it would have piqued my interest right away. I would have been very invested in where this was going, because it's like, okay, well, I saved the princess. What do I do now? There's something grander. There's something more at stake than a beautiful lady. If you could believe it.
What? No way. I like that. And this is one of the most memorable parts of the game is after you save the princess, when you cross that bridge and you get this like almost like cutscene, like this still frame of your party crossing the bridge. And it's such an epic fantasy piece of pixel art. And, that's when it really hit me, I think, the first time playing through it, that like, this is going to be grand. This is going to be a huge adventure.
Yeah. And it's, for the time, it really is. You start out in Cornelia, the city of dreams. The king of Cornelia is searching for those from Lucan's prophecy, the 4 warriors of light, and that must be us. So he sends us off to rescue his daughter, Sarah, the princess, as we said, from this swordsman that used to be the best in the empire, went rogue, named Garland. He took her off to the Chaos Shrine to the north. He says, if you save her, I'll rebuild the bridge to let you go to the northern continent. We tried, obviously, but we're no match for Garland. Go save him. Now, whenever you get there, it's like a mini dungeon. You can talk to Garland and be done with this fight in pretty quickly. His whole impetus is like, yeah, now that I've got the princess, he's got to give me the kingdom. And this is where I took down some notes. In the NES version, you talk to Garland, and he says, no one touches my princess. Light warriors, you impertinent fools. I, Garland, will knock you all down. And the Pixel remaster, they remastered it to, the king will have no choice but to exchange the kingdom for his daughter's life. Cornelia will be mine. Who's there? The king's lapdogs. Do you have any idea who you're messing with? You really think you have what it takes to cross swords with me? Very well. I, Garland, will knock you down. And it's not better because it's longer, just to be clear, and you can't judge the full work just based on this one small instance. That being said, just from what I've seen, I do think the Pixel Remaster's localization is better.
Absolutely. Not to mention, like, Garland wouldn't know you're the Light Warriors, right? Like, you just arrived in Cornelia together.
Well,
so
I guess we could assume he's familiar with the prophecy.
I suppose, but I mean, maybe you're flaunting all those crystals around, but not the best way to traverse the wilds, if you ask me. I do think, obviously, the Pixel Remaster is better. No one touches my princess is like, oh, what's his motivation here? But yeah, it's clearly stated in the remaster.
Back at this time, we didn't have your Ted Woolseys, we didn't have your Richard Honeywoods, we didn't have your Alexander O. Smiths. We didn't have the heavy hitters of localization that did this as like a full-time gig,
You spoony bard.
You spoony bard. When you're ready to confront him, Garland is here. It's not that difficult of a fight, even though he's supposed to be this amazing swordsman. That brings up the difficulty curve. The difficulty curve in this is kind of weird. And it's largely dependent on your party composition. So like,
absolutely,
I had to grind a lot, which made bosses manageable and made everything else super easy, which felt very strange. But even with a good party, the difficulty spikes later on in the game.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it spikes, and it's not a smooth increase. It's just really you run into walls with bosses, right? Some bosses will give you more trouble than others, but essentially, like, your first wall that you'll run into in any particular section of the game is whatever the dungeon for that section is. And then once you get leveled to where you could start dealing with the enemies and the multiple levels of that dungeon, then you run into the boss and you realize, oh, like maybe I have a little bit more to do before I could face this boss. Or you'll make it through them with a good party comp, but it won't be like you're running all over them. Really, I think the worst ramp in this game is the final one. Like that's the toughest challenge, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, that was tough. Once you're back, you return to the king. He does rebuild that bridge for you, and he tells you of the prophecy again. He reminds you of it. He says, "When darkness fails the world, 4 warriors of light shall come. If they cannot gather the shards of light, the darkness will consume all. The 4 crystals will never shine again." And this gives us our 4 MacGuffins in mind. We're going to do a series of quests, basically, that result in us restoring the light to these crystals. And that brings up a point about this game. This isn't plot-driven, not really. Like, the story is the experience you get through playing the game. The plot is what happens. This game's not plot-driven. This is very much like, you have to talk to everybody, and they will give you these little clues. Like, yeah, I heard that you can get this device that lets you breathe underwater. And, I heard about this town where they speak a different language. And they give you these little hints on where to go and where to get things. Very of the time, I like this quite a bit. That being said, like, I'm not going to lie and say that I didn't play this with a guide. I did, mainly because, I wanted to make sure I got through it. But I'm a big fan of talking to NPCs, and I love when they kind of give you hints on where to go and what to do in a way that makes sense, I don't like it when they say things like, "Did you know that if you press B, you can run?" I don't like that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That very much takes you out. But no, it's all very useful in this, and it's necessary, as you said, to move the story forward, right? Like, oh, there's a professor in this town who can help you learn a language. Like, he's a linguist, right? And like, it sends you there, and it's important for the quest. Like, you wouldn't know your next step without that. And it was cool at the time. It only made that world, suck me in even more as a child. But I think it benefits from the scale of what the NES could handle. There's a handful of people you could chat with in any given town, right? It's never like overwhelming. And I think some newer RPGs that kind of rely on that, or even for side quests, it's like, man, I can't go around trying to talk to like 50 to 100 people in the town. Like, that's too many people.
Correct me if I'm wrong too, but in the NES version, if you press A or A to talk to somebody and they move and they're not in front of you anymore, doesn't a box come up that just says "nothing here"?
It does.
That would drive me bananas. That would make me so mad.
So I'm because people move out of your way in this as you're trying to talk to them. So it does happen. I'm pretty sure that occurs. And there's another thing, and I can't for the life of me remember. And this is what happens when you're 40, not 30, maybe 40. When you're over 40, I guess your memory starts going, because even though it's only been 10 years since I played it, they had that cutscene of the like knights rebuilding the bridge, and I don't think that's in the original version. I do not recall having that at all. And there's a few additional cutscenes in this version that like I just have no memory of from the original NES version. So I'm guessing they're new.
And you say cutscene, but it's not like an animated anime cartoon.
Right. Yeah, it's not like the Chrono Trigger remaster with the actual animated additional cutscenes, right?
I know some people don't like those because it kind of does exactly what's in the game already, and you see the same scene twice, sort of. I'm just such a big fan of Akira Toriyama that I loved. I loved every single one of those.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about that. Funny enough,
we did.
But we did. So it was interesting to have that added in this version. I thought that was pretty cool.
It was nice. With that, though, once that bridge is built, we can go to the northern continent, and we are going to start our journey to restore light to these crystals. In so doing, we're going to take down 4 fiends, the Earth Fiend Lich in the Earth Cave, which design-wise is my favorite by a lot. Carrie in Gurgo Volcano... Gurgu?
Grogu?
Sure. In the volcano. The Kraken in the Sunken Shrine, and Tiamat, which is like a multi-headed dragon, which is also pretty sweet, in the Floating Castle. We have to destroy each of them to restore the light to the crystal. That's your boss fights. Pretty cool. But what I figured is, if we wanted to talk about any specific location between there and the final boss, now would be as good of a time as any.
Sure. Gosh, I will say, okay, Astos, you remember Astos? He's kind of like a mini boss, like a sub boss when you go to wake up the prince.
Sure.
Remember that? You had to go to that other castle that's kind of on like this northern peninsula in the marsh. Thank God for the Pixel remaster when you face Astos, because he had a spell that if you were under a certain level, it was like a guaranteed kill. It was called Rub. And it would say, Astos used rubbed, erased. And it would like erase your party members. It would just one-shot them, all of them. And it was very frustrating to play that on the NES version. So I was pleasantly surprised when I reached that point in the Pixel remaster and didn't have him cast that spell a single time.
Yeah, I don't blame you. That would drive me nuts. That is a good quality of life improvement.
Yeah. And if I could talk about one more area, there's the area. Sure. I don't. It's kind of when you first get the canoe, and you're going through all those rivers, to find the ice cave, and it's where Mount Grogu is, Gurgo Volcano. And I liked when you got to that point because you kind of have a choice. Like after the TNT, like the nitro blows up, and you set sail into this area of the map that you hadn't been able to reach, right? Pretty much from that point on, it gives you like options, but it kind of smartly pigeonholes you into where you can go, because like the boat can't pull in anywhere unless there's a dock for it, right? But I remember being a kid, and as soon as I had like this whole area of the map that like I didn't know existed prior to that moment, it was just so mind-blowing. Like the game was so much bigger than I had ever envisioned, and it was just like so cool. And then it was also cool to have the choice of like, oh, am I gonna, what am I gonna do first? Where am I gonna go first? Especially when you get the airship, there's kind of you have options. You don't have to complete the game in the set order. There's not that linearity that so many games dealt with at the time, and like that was just so refreshing from a game from that era. And I still enjoy it. Even playing today.
It's also why talking to NPCs is so important. They'll, kind of help guide you where to go. Mm-hmm. Because, like you said, the story is the game, but the plot is what happens. There's no plot. You can go anywhere. One thing I was surprised to see a distinction between a ship and a canoe. The ship is the first one you get. You get it after going to Provoca, where pirates have just taken over a town. And it's a super easy boss fight to take these pirates down. And you whoop their asses, and they're like,
that's right.
They're like, I've had myself a change of heart. Take my ship. I'm going to work so hard in this town now. Which, if you ask me, that's the problem with today's society, is that pirates just don't work as hard anymore.
Absolutely.
They're lazy. Ever since they don't have to worry about scurvy, they've lost their moral code. That's the problem
right.
with today's kids. But we get that ship, and like you said, it only docks, in docks. But then you get a canoe later on that lets you cross smaller channels of water. And that one, you can't cross the ocean in a canoe, right? That's just good life advice. That's a didactic little parable. That's something your dad would tell you one day before baseball practice, unprompted, and you'd be like, what the hell is he talking about?
That's like an inspiring quote. That's going to go on my office wall.
You can't cross the ocean in a canoe. It's true. You can't go down Niagara Falls in a barrel.
That's also true.
It's true. People have done it. Not me, though. That is very neat that you get that little canoe, and it really opens up the map. You can go in all of these little channels and hidden caves behind waterfalls, or at least one of them. Very, very neat. I was
I like
not
that they don't
expecting it.
forget about it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine. I agree with you. They don't forget about it. You use it for the rest of the game.
Right. I love that. I love that. Like, it's because the ship in some ways feels that way, right? Once you get the airship, it's like, well, I don't even know where I parked my ship anymore. I might as well go give it back to the pirates in Provoca.
Well, you can't park your airship anywhere. If you try to park it in trees, it goes, and then it goes, and it comes right back up.
And this was more pronounced in the NES version, like how particular it was. And it's partially because of, it's essentially like the Pixel Remaster is a 16-bit game, not an 8-bit game. And that's very evident when you're flying around in the airship. In the NES version, if you tried landing that thing on what looked like a square patch of plains land, it still wouldn't let you do it if it was like in between a desert and a forest and mountains. Like you still wouldn't be able to land there. So it's it definitely has the same effect in the Pixel Remaster. You can only land in the same spots you were able to in the NES version, but I think it looks a little bit more clear in the Pixel Remaster about where you can land.
I had a note here about the town Elfheim. I don't know why. I just really like that town. The town music, like you had said, it's very pleasant. I don't know, like nothing happens in Elfheim. Not really. It's just a pleasant little town. I like how it's laid out. I don't know. There's also
surrounded by the marsh.
That's true. Yeah. Is Elfheim the town where the tombstone that says "Here lies Link" is?
It is. It is that very town.
I found that by accident. That was really delightful. I got a big chuckle out of that. And then I checked every other tombstone that I came across. And they all just say it's a gravestone.
Right. In every other town in the game or anywhere you come across them.
I did have one more area that I wanted to shout out. Mount Duergar. I was so thrilled to walk in here. When we walked in, you see a bunch of dwarfs, not dwarves. Thank you, Tolkien. You see a bunch of dwarfs, and that alone is enough to get me excited. But then you talk to them, and it's the same dwarfs from Final Fantasy IX and Condapeti. They have a thick Scottish accent, and it's localized differently to lolly-ho instead of rally-ho, because the Japanese L and the R are, to English speakers sounds very similar. But I was so thrilled. I was chuffed as nuts to see these little Scottish dwarfs just all around being little guys. I do like them a bit more in 9. They have a little bit more personality just because, they have more space to write. Right. So they could talk about wanting to eat and, all the ools around instead of owls. This was really delightful though. I love this little area. Lolly-ho.
I like that there's a side quest that brings you back there too later in the game.
Yeah. That's where you get the Masamune, right? Or no, not Masamune, the Excalibur. Yeah, which I had the adamantite, but I didn't have a warrior, so it was useless to me.
Get some good money for that, though.
Yeah, I was rolling in it. What did I need it for?
Right.
Did you have any others that you wanted to shout out before we talk about the final boss and the sort of ending of this game?
Yeah, I obviously this is something synonymous with Final Fantasy now, but the mix of kind of futuristic tech and fantasy was in this game. And that stuck out to me as a kid when you get to the tower and Tiamat's essentially like level, right?
Oh, yeah, that one
Tiamat's dungeon.
That one random mini boss mecha warrior or something.
Yeah, but also when you go into the waterfall and you find a robot there who gives you the item you need to like continue the quest. And then there's other robots like NPCs in that dungeon that you come across. And like you do come across, more tech-based enemies when you make it to Tiamat's lair. And like, I always thought that was so cool as a kid because I'm like, man, I want to know more about this world. Like when were those made? Like what happened with like, because it alludes to that. The elves came from the sky and they lived up there in the past. And it's those little tidbits of like lore that, just make it very fleshed out. Like they knew what they were doing. They had a plan and they had a world that this story existed in. And I love that. I love that sort of detail.
They absolutely did. They even telegraph the time loop element that's coming in. With the elves, they say like, yeah, we sent 4 or 5 warriors out 500 years ago, and they've never returned. And you learn that they get turned into bats, and you get to talk to them. They're all still here. And this is before you're explicitly told this is a time loop, but you get told that here at the end, after you destroy all of the fiends, you open a portal and restore the light to the crystals. You open a portal in the Temple of Chaos, where we first went to fight Garland at the beginning of the game. It takes you back 2,000 years into the past, and this is where you get to confront the creator of the fiends, Chaos, who is actually Garland.
Yeah.
What happened was 2,000 years ago, he sent, and please correct me if this is incorrect, this is like, again, this is not meant to be analyzed. This is just your weekend D&D campaign, right? They're not trying to write a great novel. It's just a fun fiction, a fun fantasy, and that's okay. But what happened was 2,000 years ago, Garland sent the fiends forward in time so that they might send him backward in time before his death. And that creates this infinite sort of loop of time where Garland gets to live forever, basically. And this leads into the final fight. He transforms into Chaos, which even in the NES version looks so sweet.
Oh, absolutely. Like you had said, Lich was your favorite, but I was like, man, I gotta put my hat off to Chaos here.
Ooh, that's a good point. Chaos or Lich? I think I'm still going Lich. Like, I love Lich's design.
No, that's fair. It's a great design.
Chaos, you had mentioned earlier, this is where the difficulty spikes the most. Chaos is long. Chaos is a long fight. And it is tough. He can cast haste on himself, and I don't know. I grinded a lot between my second and third time. I beat him on my third time. My second and third time, I grinded a lot. He was still one-shotting my guys, mostly one-shotting my guys if he used physical attacks. Now, if he used magic attacks that hit everybody, that was nothing. Like, I could handle that unless it was flare. But if he was punching, that oftentimes would one-shot most people. It didn't one-shot the monk, or whatever, the master monk. Didn't one-shot him. It generally didn't one-shot my red wizard, but like if he hit my white mage with that, she was done. Like, out. TKO.
Yeah. So do you know why flare did more damage than like the magic attacks?
Because it's non-elemental, right?
That's right. It does physical damage.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's right. That's also why that is the OP spell. Whenever you go back in time, you're going to have to fight the 4 fiends all over again, which is something I really like. I really like revisiting bosses, and they're stronger, which does kind of imply that these fiends get softer with age. So they're not too different from us humans, huh? When did this pain come into my neck, and why does it hurt whenever I turn a certain way? It's been happening for 3.5 weeks. Please help. But you do fight them all over again. Flare is the OP spell to use because, and I think Holy as well, because they do physical damage, or at least Flare. At least Flare does. I don't know about Holy.
I will say, the way I wouldn't fight him is using all monks. I'll tell you that much. What level were you when you were able, what was like the average level of your party when you were able to defeat Chaos?
50. Everybody was 50.
Oh, yeah. Nice. That's the way to do it. That's like right about my first playthrough where I was. I think just by playing through the game, you're going to be about level 50 when you get there. For the all monk playthrough, I had to have them up to level 65.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's one of the interesting things about the monk that we didn't talk about, and something that I did not know, because I'm pretty sure this is something maybe the game manual tells you. Well, one thing that's easy to see is most equipment that you put on his body is going to lower his defense. Like, unless it's a ribbon, you really don't want him wearing anything, which is how I like to go out on Saturdays. But weapons will raise his attack power. But the thing is if you leave him unequipped with a weapon, and I'm pretty sure you told me this, so if I misunderstood, please correct me. If you leave him unequipped, he's going to do more hits and output more damage, and that's what you want.
Yeah, but I don't know for sure that is the case if you don't start that scaling from the beginning of the game. So with my all monk team, gotcha. I didn't equip anything. I didn't equip weapons to them. I just started from the get-go, and I think it's something in the coding of the game. Like the way it handles scaling is essentially like your attack output becomes greater if you don't equip a weapon, which is cool. If it wasn't intentional, it's still really freaking cool because like, think of this karate master and like he's only strengthening his hands with each punch he gives, right?
He's not tempted by the new technology.
Yeah, it's so cool. And So by the end of the game, I was landing like 12 hits for significant damage, like 1,000 damage. Yeah. So it's cool. And the weight of armor also, as you mentioned, is what knocks their evasion down. So a monk, the one thing is he's a glass cannon, but he can evade a whole lot of attacks. And if you put armor on him, he can no longer do that. And I like that. Like, that is a logical thing, right? When you're thinking of someone who is like this kung fu master, essentially, right?
It is neat. I did not know. I had no idea. So my monk was honestly not a great asset to me through most of my game. I gave him the Masamune towards the end and was just buffing him with saber and haste and temper. So he was
giant
dealing,
glove.
He was dealing tons of damage. But I mean, without that, I would not have beat Chaos, I don't think.
Yeah, and I the one thing with the all monk team is that there's only 3 ribbons in the game, which is frustrating, very frustrating. Essentially, like, you have a 4th party member who doesn't have ribbon, and ribbon offers a whole lot of magic defense. So I had one monk who was pretty much worthless in that chaos fight, because as soon as he would cast a magic spell that damaged everyone, that 4th monk would just take so much damage. And I believe the remakes, not the Pixel remaster, but like the GBA and PSP versions actually had a 4th ribbon in some of the additional content.
Well, I can tell you I didn't find one. I only had 3 as well. I definitely had one on my monk. I think maybe I left it off of the red mage because, like, he was kind of the least indispensable, the most dispensable. That's how prefixes work. So I wasn't like too broken up if he was down. Mainly because, like, my black mage was dealing flare. My white mage had full life and holy and Curaga and Heolaja. So, like, she needed to be protected at all costs.
Yeah. Keep her alive.
I put her in the last position just in case, actually.
Nice.
But yeah, you beat Chaos and you sever the tie, you sever the loop. And what this does is it undoes the loop, which means it undoes your heroic deeds, and your heroism will forever lie unknown, which I'm a big fan of stories that do this, where virtue is its own reward. The protags just end up as normal people. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. Like, we saved the world and no one knows. I love that.
It's its own reward, right? The reward is the virtue of what we've done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's Final Fantasy. I'm really glad that I went through it. It's not going to be the last Final Fantasy game of the year. We have a couple more. But this was a real treat. I'm not going to replay it anytime soon. And if I'm being totally honest, I'm probably not going to play the NES. Maybe on an emulator. I'm not sure. But I could see myself going through this again.
Next year?
Maybe.
I'm kidding. I'm going to play through it again. I know I am. I just know it. And thank you for getting me to play through it again. It had been too long. And I think between my 2 playthroughs, I'm at about, 20 some odd hours. And it's incredible to me because it made me think, wow, this is only 2 playthroughs. Like, how many hours have I played Final Fantasy in my life? And it was worth every one of them. I will say that.
Well, I'm glad that you joined me. This was an absolute blast. We've got to the end of the show, so now I want to give you a space to talk about List Off. You've been on the show before, longtime listeners know. But for new listeners who aren't familiar, why don't you tell them a little bit about what you and Brian do? Brian still hasn't come on the show. He doesn't like me. I don't know why.
Brian loves you.
What you and Brian do, and what new episodes you've got going on, where they can find you, all that stuff.
Sure. So I am one half of List Off Podcast with Brian and me being the Ryan. And yeah, we put out bi-weekly episodes where we do lists that are all around the gaming world. So we just started having guests back on, and our first guest back on the show was actually Rick. And we did our favorite handheld consoles. We recently did racing games, PS4 games, our favorite weird games. Just recorded one that was about our favorite solo developed games. So if you're into that kind of stuff, you like lists, you like hearing people's opinions on games, feel free to give us a listen. We're available anywhere you get your podcasts.
I co-sign List Off. It is a terrific, terrific show. And I always love going on. I love talking about our handhelds. That was a great episode. A lot of fun.
You brought a level of expertise to it that we just couldn't reach. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Oh, I don't know about that. They're fun to tinker with and fun to experiment with, but it's a good time. And that was a great episode. Listoff is a great show. You could find links to them in the description. You can also find links to all of our stuff, all of Pixel Project Radio stuff. And I want to draw your attention to just a few things. First, we do have a Discord server. It is free to join, and it's a great way to not just hang out with the community, but keep up to date with the show. That's usually where I announce things first, is in the Discord and the Patreon, if applicable. And occasionally, I'm able to give special episodes or special cuts of episodes to the Discord members. That admittedly doesn't happen too often, but listen, it's free, it's a great place to hang, it's my favorite place to hang, and I think you should consider it. I also think you should consider stopping by the Patreon page. That's patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. In addition to a backlog of content going back years, you will also get our schedule in advance, voting privileges to decide what is being done both on the Patreon and in the main feed, and, let's be honest, the satisfaction of supporting somebody who's creating stuff, which I think we should all be doing more of. But if you'd like to check it out, you can do that at patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. And finally, you can find links to all of our socials. Mainly, that's going to be Blue Sky. We are still on Instagram, not quite as active. Instagram is a bit barren for most podcasts from what I'm seeing these days, unless you're one of the big ones like NPR. But we ain't no NPR. We're just a little guy. You can find us on Blue Sky on Instagram. We are also on TikTok and YouTube. You can certainly listen on YouTube if you'd like. Those don't count towards the metrics, so I don't love that, but the episodes are there. I do occasionally put out shorts on YouTube and TikToks on TikTok. Haven't been doing as much of that lately, but there is more to come, so if you'd like to subscribe there as well, you can do so. And with that, once again, Ryan, gotta say thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Well, Rick, I gotta say thank you to you. I'm serious. Like, this is one of the most meaningful games from my entire life, and it had been, like I said, it's just been too long since I had played it. And when you asked me to come on for this episode, I was very flattered, very honored. So I definitely appreciate it.
Hey, the pleasure is all mine. I'm glad that you got to join, and I'm glad that you got to replay it. This was just an all-around good time.
Heck yeah.
With that, it's time to close out the episode. I am Rick, your host, as always. Once again, thank you. Thank you for sticking around. We're signing off for now. Take care.